Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at voltage normalized Probinator results. So basically the goal with all of this testing is to get the boards to, the target is 1.3 volts die sense. Now, unfortunately, I don't have die sense readings for all of the boards here. I'm not allowed to modify this because that's on loan to me from MSI. I am allowed to modify this, which is how I got die sense readings out of it. So thank you, fan of the channel who funded the purchase of that motherboard. This has die sense readings from in software, though I don't know how reliable they are because that right there, like this does not make any sense, right? No, yep, nope. I don't know how that works. I don't know how this works either. This makes sense because that's actually 10 millivolts lower than that, so that's fine. Also, all of the Gigabyte boards here are provided to me by Gigabyte, so yeah. Not that that helps them here because, you know, I was just punching in data from the oscilloscope. So if the board says, if the scope says the board sucks, board sucks. So anyway, then we have the Gene, which again, thank you to a fan of the channel for funding the purchase of that. And then we have the Dark, which was provided to me by EVGA. And I do have, so that, like, a lot of these boards are modified because basically I just want to see if it's possible to improve the performance on some of these. But I will say this, modding the Dark, completely bloody pointless. Like, it makes literally zero difference. Zero. Unlike on some of the other boards, like the Overshoot would reduce a little bit, or, you know, there'd be some small improvements like that. The Dark does not care at all. No improvement whatsoever. Other thing worth noting, all of the testing was done at 5.1 gigahertz CPU, 4.6 gigahertz ring, 3733 CL18 memory across the board. So that's kind of that. Let's hide those columns. And yeah, so actually I don't know why, I keep this. Well, no, I do know why I keep this test. On some boards, it manages to get even worse minimums. So, yeah, well, let's talk about the results. Now, so the thing is with this testing with the Probe-inator is just like, I keep having, like, also, if you don't know what the Probe-inator is, I'm going to leave a link down in the description to, actually, description and comments to sort of relevant videos that you need to watch before watching this one to make sense of this one. And maybe actually, like, I should just make a Probinator playlist and you can just go watch all of them. Though there's one that you need to watch first. And then all the other ones kind of make more sense. Well, actually, no, there's probably like two you need to watch first, and then everything else, like all of the data videos, you can watch after that. So yeah, like if you're bored, you have nothing to do for several hours, there's your playlist. Anyways, so let's talk about the results because I don't want to re-explain everything over and over again. So, I guess, so since this is all voltage normalized, the goal is like the boards are reading the same die sense voltage, or on boards where I don't have the die sense voltage, I just aim to get the same average voltage reading from the oscilloscope. There is a margin of error here, so like the Dark, like here's the thing, like with the Gene and the Dark, I was trying to match the Dark against the Gene. So that's why like this is all at 1.37 because all of this was at like 1.37-ish. And then with like the Phantom Gaming ITX, I didn't really necessarily care too much about matching it against the Gene. And also the thing is like we can actually like the performance as far as I'm concerned is more like average versus minimum. Not necessarily like with some of the past testing, the problem was like some of the boards, like there was big voltage differences. Like the board, like some boards at some LLCs were like 50 millivolts off other boards. So at that point, it's like, well, the voltage itself might be playing a bigger role in the results than the actual, voltage regulation performance performance of the actual motherboard itself. So at that point, so that's kind of like where I was just like, okay, I need to do voltage normalized testing where it's like the boards are all grouped around a very small set of voltages so that you can just kind of go like, okay, well, there's a 40 millivolt gap between average and minimum on this board, and there's a 50 millivolt gap on between voltage and average and minimum on the other board. So the 40 millivolt board is better than the 50 millivolt board. So that's kind of the point of doing all of the like all of this data right here. But the other thing that this data makes me really wonder about is just like, what do you like? What performance metric do you go for? Right? Because if we look at this, right, if we look at like level 2 LLC, 1.29 there, 1.32 here. But the funny thing is 128K like 128K FFT size Prime 95 runs significantly cooler than 16K. So, in theory, like the slightly lower voltage is probably fine for the stability. Like like this would probably pass. Like level 2 might actually be completely fine in terms of stability testing, at least within the range of stability tests that I'm testing. But it also makes me wonder, like, because we see these differences, it's like at level 3 LLC, right? You have 1.31 versus 1.32. So these are nice and close together. So that's like, okay, there shouldn't really be any issues. There shouldn't really be any weird issues with that. This might run into like level 1, on the other hand, could easily run into a situation where like 16K is completely stable, but 128K does crash because it's all like 40. Yeah, that's 40 millivolts lower. So at that point, it might actually, start showing a stability difference. But it makes me wonder about like, well, because the thing is like, I think one of the reasons why like a while ago, or well, when I was getting into sort of overclocking, Intel burn test was actually pretty new, and people were praising it because it was like, oh my god, this is so much faster to find instability than like Prime 95 small FFT size. And the funny thing is, if you actually look at how Intel burn test, like the transients caused by Intel burn test compared to 16K, like small FFT Prime 95, yeah, it's pretty obvious why it's more stability sensitive, because it's way noisier. It looks a lot more like 128K than it does like 16K. But yeah, anyway, I test with 128K for convenience. But the thing that it makes me wonder about is also like scenarios where it's like, you can pass, say, Cinebench, you can pass, tens of hours of, say, Prime 95, which is way heavier than Cinebench, mind you. But yeah, you can pass, 10 hours, 16K Prime 95, and then you start a game, and that crashes, right? That's not stable. And that makes me wonder, like, okay, well, maybe it's because of like differences like this, where it's just like, like Prime 95 has a minimum voltage of 1.32 volts, so it's stable. But then your game can, maybe the game is causing a transient that's as big as the one that, 128K FFT size causes, where it's going from 1.37 volts to 1.28, right? Which, like, this is a 40 millivolt gap. That right there is 90. So, the game causes a 90 millivolt gap, and it's just like, yeah, now it crashes. And then it's just like, well, but is there like a minimum voltage requirement for the game to be stable, right? And if that minimum voltage requirement is not like, you might meet that minimum voltage requirement at level 2. It might not be necessary to go all the way down to level 3. Because level 3, you're looking at like you are looking at setting 1.47 as your idle voltages are going to be insane, essentially. Which also isn't great. So that's kind of the thing. Is like, this really makes me wonder, like, there has to be some kind of like reasonable test method that reflects like real world results, because it's all very well and good when I can run synthetics and find scenario, like, because the thing is, I can because I can measure what is going on, I can intentionally find scenarios that don't happen, but do cause the measurements to show things that are absolutely horrendous, right? And it's just like, well, if it never actually happens, who cares that in this one scenario, it's not stable, right? So that's kind of the thing, because I can really, like, I can push this a lot further, and I ran into some, like, kind of interesting effects with some of the testing. And the other thing is, because the other thought I had is, like, you could theoretically run a non-linear load line, and that would then give you, like, like you could run a load line that looks like a mishmash of level 2 and level 3, because 128K FFT size doesn't pull anywhere near as much current as 16K does, which is why, like, at the lower LLC levels, like level 3, 4, it ends up at a higher average voltage than 16K, right? Because there's more droop on 16K. So if you had an LLC that basically is like, oh yeah, up until, I don't know, 100 amps, you're going to droop there's not going to be much droop, so the average voltage is going to be really high. And then once you get up to really high currents, that's when the droop like really gets really low, and it's just like, well, okay, so that might pass the 16K 128K test, but what if you find a workload that just falls outside of whatever well, yeah, actually no. No, because okay, no, actually that would work just fine, I think. Well, no, because the concern is basically if you find something that runs just as hot as 16K, but can cause a voltage deviation as big as 128K, then your nonlinear load line is just gonna... Well, actually, no, because you're not gonna... You couldn't even stability test for that, though. Like, I'm trying to... Because you'd need to find a synthetic that does that, so that you could check your stability. And if you... Well, and that's the thing. If you had a synthetic that does that, you could just fit your nonlinear load line to that synthetic that does that. And there, you're now sorted. It's now stable under all scenarios. So, yeah. It's, like, this is a really weird thing to test, in my opinion. And I really wish... and at this point, I really wish I wasn't the only person doing this kind of testing. Unfortunately, this is also testing that is just like nobody cares. It's like I think the Probinator is like the coolest thing I've ever come up with. But to be completely honest, most people like they stress test with IDA. Like they run the equivalent, like they don't stress test at all is basically what I'm getting at. Is like, you know, it's just like, yeah, I run IDA and my system is stable, and it's just like, so in other words, you've just never actually tested it for stability is what you're telling me, and that's why it's stable. Yeah. So, you know, it's just like, yeah. So that really makes me wonder a lot, like with this data where it's just like, oh wait, where was I going? No, I wish there was other people also doing this testing so I would have somebody to compare notes with. Okay, where it's not like, and so yeah, because it's just like I'm really annoyed that I have all this data and it's just like, well, I don't know what actual conclusions to draw from this, because, you know, if the only way to get because like the thing is, once the CPU is fully loaded, it can't get loaded more. Right? Like that's the other end of it. It's just like you want, because like if the CPU is pulling 150 amps and running insanely hot, it can't suddenly start pulling 300. Okay, because that's like, because the with 128K the CPU is I think it averages around like 100 amps current draw. And it's averaging this 100 amps, right? So that's quite a bit of current. And the reason why you get this really low minimum is because there's going to be big changes in the current draw. So it might be bouncing between like, I don't know, 50 amps and 150, right? And it averages out to 100-ish. But the, you know, load step is 100 amps tall. But the thing is like, well, if the CPU is already pulling 150 amps, it can't pull more current. So it can't cause a bigger load step at that point. So that's the other concern, is just like, yeah, maybe this literally is the worst thing ever for the CPU. Like, there's nothing worse you could do to it. Except maybe, like, I did notice that if you run offset voltage, there's some interesting behavior at FFT sizes that aren't 128K. Like, they're between 16K and 128K. You start running into some interesting effects. But I still need to, like, I need to test that on more motherboards. And I just need to do more testing on that in general. But at the same time, I'm also thinking, like, this is such a massive time sink. Do I even want to do more testing? Like, I think more people would be more interested in seeing more different motherboards tested rather than me testing, like, weird edge case scenarios where it's like, look, I found a scenario where it's not stable again. And it's just like, does anybody care anymore? Just like, oh yeah, if you use offset voltage, it's going to crash in 32K FFT size, but it's going to run better in 16K and 128K. I think it's 32K. It might be 64. That causes like the really, like, it's really strange because I think, because if you run a static LLC, it actually behaves better than 128K, which is why I never stumbled across it, because I, as a principle for a very long time, don't use offset voltages, because if you use offset voltages, weird stuff happens to your voltages, and I don't like things being weird, right? Like, I like the voltage I like the voltage doing things that I demand when I demand them, which is that it doesn't bloody change at random. Offset voltage lets the CPU kind of, do its thing, and you can just kind of tell it, yeah, do your thing, but do it with 50 millivolts more or 50 millivolts less, and that causes some strange things to happen sometimes that I don't like dealing with, which is why I run static. But the thing is like, so on static, I've never seen, like, on static, I didn't run into that. Like, I tested I went from, like, I tested 8K, 16K, 32K, 64K, 128K, 192K, and 128K was the FFT size where I was like, oh my god, this is really, really bad. And then at 192K, it's like, well, this is less bad than 128K, and 64K is less bad than 128K as well. So it was like, yeah, I'm testing everything with 128K because it's the worst thing I could find. But then it's like, when you run offset, I think it's 64K that actually, like, the offset voltage ends up being really, like, it runs almost as hot as 16K, but it causes, well, no, I think the CPU just randomly decided to run relatively low voltage at 64K FFT size for no apparent reason, and the minimums end up suffering for it. And so with offset voltage, there's also other scenarios that I'm thinking of testing where it's like, well, what if you only load up one core, or multiple cores, or how, like, the different numbers of cores loaded up, because that'll have effects as well with offset voltage. And it's just like, yeah, so and I'm not sure if I even want to test that, because it's just like, but static works fine. Static doesn't do that weird stuff, so I'd just run static instead. And then it's also like, I'd need to actually validate that it's a stability hazard, which, well, the thing is well, or more like, validate how much of a stability hazard it is. Not like, because it is like, if the minimums are lower, it's not like it's less stable. Like, I've already proven that to myself enough, and there's a video showing it. Like, if the minimums go down, the stability goes with them. But yeah, it's just like, I don't know if I want to test that too much. Anyway, let's talk performance results between the various motherboards. So 128K is, of course, like, as far, like, let's just assume that 128K is the worst case scenario. Let's talk performance. So, the Phantom Gaming ITX is kind of a unique case of there's no bad LLC. Like, you cannot set the LLC on this motherboard high enough to really make things any worse. This board, across the board, is 90 millivolts between the minimum and the average. So 1.37, 1.28, 1.38, 1.29, 1.4, 1.31, 1.43, 1.34. Right? It's always 90 millivolts. That just seems to be the limit of what the motherboard can do. And yeah, it just stays at that. So that's kind of that, like, yeah, that's that. There's not really anything that'll change. So that's kind of interesting, though. I do believe, let's go back here. I do believe my modified version of the board is actually outperforming the stock version. So just, wait, no, 128K. Yeah, so my modified version made an improvement, but it made it on the first round of modifications. Very, very slight improvement. And only, like, the thing is, like, this is, again, 90, and this is 90, whereas originally it would have been 100. So it's like, okay. So yeah, my modified version of the Phantom Gaming ITX, it just does 90 millivolts across the board. A retail board, you'd actually want to run like level 2, maybe level 3. I'd argue you could probably, like, the thing is, again, is just like, well, 128K goes down to 1.29, and the thing is, 128K doesn't run that hot on average, so it's just like this might actually be fine. That's kind of the thing. So but if you just want if you just want the smallest difference in minimums, level 3 is the choice to go for, because it's 1.32, 1.31, 1.32. I would not use level 4, because level 4 is just, it's so much droop that you just can't go anywhere with it, right? Like, it's so much freaking droop. Like this is great. Like 1.43, 1.34, right? Like this is really nice that your 192K minimum and 128K minimum is really high, but it's just like it is so droopy that like you need to set like 1.56 volts before you get 1.3 volts in 16K, and it doesn't improve your 16K performance at all. So it's just like, I just would not use that. Level 4 is terrible as far as I'm concerned. Way too much droop. So level 2 or 3, best options, and probably, like, I'd honestly probably just use level 2 and just stick to under 1.4, how much? Actually, yeah, under 1.42 volts at, like, level 2. I'm not sure. Like, what really annoys me about the Phantom Gaming ITX is that board actually defaults the LLC to level 1 every time you change the core voltage, which is really annoying because, like, that is definitely not the optimal LLC setting, right? Like, level 2, if it was defaulting to level 2, I could get that. Level 3, maybe I could still get that. Level 1, no. Also, there's no LLC with no droop on that board. Like, you can't disable droop on that board, so that's worth noting as well. Anyway, level 2 or 3 are probably your best bets for stability. Depends on how you stability test. Gaming Edge. So, interestingly enough, if you look at the peak-to-peak values, the Gaming Edge looks like an absolute freaking disaster. But if you look at the average to minimum, it's actually not that bad. That's 100 millivolts. That's 110 millivolts. That's 100 millivolts. That's 100 millivolts. That's 100 millivolts. That's 100 millivolts. So it never really gets better, but it's also worth noting that this is 90. Right, like this is 90, 90, 90, 90. So there's a 10 millivolt difference between the Gaming Edge and the Phantom Gaming ITX. What else is there? Right, the 16K FFT performance is the same on both. Optimal LLC, I think for the Gaming Edge, you're looking at like mode 4 or, well, 4, 5, 6. Like 6 is closest to level 3 on the Asrock. But mode 4, you might be able to get away with mode 3. Again, really depends on what kind of stability testing you conduct, right? Like that's kind of the thing. Mode like 3 through 5, I think is like viable amounts of droop. The thing is just like here it goes up to 1.29. So, which if the board had, if MSI had actually bothered to populate all the capacitors behind the CPU socket, I think this would have probably been doing 1.3 instead of 1.29. But it's just a 10 millivolt difference at the same time. So it's like, instead of, like, if we went to level mode 6 versus level 3 on MSI versus Asrock, like, basically the MSI board would, if you need 1.47 volts for stability on the Asrock, you would need 1.48 volts for stability on the Gaming Edge, right? So that's a 10 millivolt difference, which really isn't that significant. Also, I would not set above 1.45 volts on a Intel CPU. Honestly, I still wouldn't necessarily set above 1.42 either. Just like, yeah. Cuz I had a Sandy Bridge CPU that would idle on like it's not like I had VDroop disabled. I had like medium LLC on an Asus board, so it had plenty of droop. Yeah, but idling that thing on like 1.5-ish for like a year really didn't go well with that chip. So, and that was 32 nanometers. So, yeah, I would basically stick to, 1.42 volts or less. And then you can crank, like, as far as, like, I would just crank up the LLC because I don't believe in idling on high voltage. It's a bad idea. Because the thing is, it's just like, not only are you idling high, it's also like, what if you're running a single core workload or a 2-core workload? Like, your voltage is going to be insane. And if you're pulling a lot of current and all of that current is going through one core, yeah, sure, the rest of your chip might not be degrading, but that core is going to hate you very soon. So that's kind of the thing, is just like, yeah, I would not, like, this is mostly like the insane voltages I'm running here are mostly for testing purposes. They're not like I would actually run this daily. This is just kind of like, well, I wanted 1.3 volts die sense, so that's the only way to get it, right? Like, that's kind of the thing here. So yeah, MSI is only about 10 millivolts worse than the Asrock, so that's not as much of a difference as I thought there would be. Yeah, that's kind of that. I'd probably run like 3.4 Yeah, 3, 4, 5 are probably your best options. I'd say mode 6 is a bit too much, and level 3 is probably a bit too much. I really wish there was a level 2.5 on the Asrock board. So, yeah. Also, I don't know why they have a level 5 at all. Like, level 5, like, level 4, I'm setting 1.55 volts. Level 5 is even more droop. Like, that's got to be 1.6 volts or something to get 1.3 volts die sense. Like, I have, like, that has to be the equivalent of, like, the Dark has it, right? Like, on the Dark, you have plus 90% more droop than Intel spec, which is like, why on earth would you ever want more, like, that much more droop? Like, what would it do? Especially since none of these boards, like, the funny thing is, past a certain amount of droop, the voltage difference between your average and your minimum just doesn't bloody change at all. So it's just like, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me to start adding droop because, like, none of these boards really need, like, the more droop doesn't do anything at some point. It just makes the voltage lower and it doesn't improve the stability at all. Anyway, so yeah, Phantom Gaming versus the ITX, 10 millivolt difference. And this is really, like, I'm still going to stick to my recommendation. Like, I honestly, like, either of these is a good board for, like, the thing is, both of them need airflow over the VRM. The MSI is significantly better at memory overclocking. The MSI is also cheaper, and that's why overall I still prefer the MSI board, even if the VRM's, regulation isn't like, it's not as good as the ASRock one is, but it's not that much worse, not a significant amount. And I don't think, like, well, you might run into scenarios where 10 millivolts might make or break an overclock, but it's just like, well, I'd just run the extra 10 millivolts, honestly. Like, I'd just bloody run them. Just be like, fine, like, yeah. So that's kind of that. Anyway, if we look at the Master, Master's a bit of a disappointment, honestly. And this is a modified version, but the modified version, like, the various mods of the Master I did, they don't do anything, which is kind of like, the funny thing is, where is it? Yeah. Oh, wait, no, it did help. Oh, damn. That's bad. Oh, no. Yeah, that's 1.31 versus 1.3. Actually, but the average is basically the same. Rounding issues. I really wish my equipment was more sensitive. Like, if I had one more digit, that would be great. Yeah, cheap oscilloscopes. What you gonna do about it? Okay, well, that's a problem, isn't it? So my Master at this point is not completely stock. But, yeah, so the thing with the Master is, well, you shouldn't use Ultra Extreme or Extreme anyway. I didn't test Turbo, which, for, like, that's the stupid part. Like, that's the stupid thing on my part, because it's like, if I tested Turbo, because, like, Extreme, like, those are LLC levels you shouldn't be using, and I've already proven, like, with the Gene, that's the only LLC level where I've, like, improved the minimums, if I remember correct. Well, yeah, it's like the silly LLCs where it's like, oh yeah, I can actually make a difference to the minimums, where it's like 1.35. Revision 0.1 was actually worse for some reason. Congratulations, me. But revision 0.2 fixed that, and revision 0.3 didn't manage to push it any further. But yeah, it's just like, I actually picked up 10 millivolts on the Gene, and then I actually managed to pick up 20 from the level 7 LLC. So level 8 is just a weird, like, that LLC just has weird issues because it's so damn high. So yeah, that's kind of the thing, is just like, at the high, like, at the LLCs that you wouldn't actually want to use, that is where the differences happen. At LLCs that are actually practical, that's where, my modifications kind of fall flat, where they don't do anything. So I wouldn't be too fussed about the fact that I don't actually have results here from a Bone Stock Master, because I don't think they'd be significantly different at LLC levels that are actually worth using. So speaking of LLC levels that are worth using, Turbo, 90 millivolts difference, right? 1.35 versus 1.26, 1.37 versus 1.28. So again, 90. That's 90? Yeah, that is 90, right? I'm not being an idiot. 0.28, 1.3. Yeah, that's 90. And then for some reason, at medium, it gets worse. It does 100. Like, honestly, I think Like, I really wonder if the master doesn't need like it might be a firmware thing. Like with that board, I really wonder it might be a firmware thing. But anyway, so master's doing basically the same kind of voltage regulation results as the Phantom Gaming ITX. All right, also 90 millivolts. Best case scenario, if you're wondering, like, wait, so what's like a great motherboard? Well, a great motherboard does 80, right? So like the dark, it just does 80 from like minus 50% all the way to default. Then we have the Gene, where the Gene also is just like you do 80 from level 5. Actually, from like level 4. Well, actually, no, it should be from like level. That's 90, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah, that's 90. That's still 90. So yeah, the Gene does. Actually, it's only level 5 and 4. Disappointment. Minor disappointment. So that's actually funny. Okay, so the dark, like the thing is like the differences are very minor, right? It's 10 millivolts, and also keep in mind my like it's 10 millivolts as the rounded value from my oscilloscope, right? So this right here, like this could very well have been 1.285 instead of 1.284, right? That's the thing. So I really wish I had more sensitive equipment, because right now, like some of these boards are like margin of error of each other, right? Especially because like the max volt, like the overshoot voltages are different as well. So it's just like, yeah, so the overshoot is higher, and then like, so it's just like, so you can't even use like the peak to peak values to compare, because it's just like, yeah, like these are getting blown up by the overshoot. They're not getting blown up because the undershoot is huge, right? If you have a huge undershoot, that's what causes stability issues. But we're not like, yeah, I'm not seeing, like, I'm really not seeing that. And unfortunately, my equipment not sensitive enough. Man, I really wish my equipment was better. And it doesn't. Thing is, slightly better oscilloscope costs like a ridiculous amount more money. To be like, because oscilloscopes are generally expensive. Also, I really wanted to get a oscilloscope that's like a mixed signal scope, so that I can actually correlate transients to the PWM signals of the VRM, because I think that would be really, really cool to look at. Unfortunately, mixed signal scopes are expensive, even if you're looking at like low end ones. And you want, like, the thing is, I need like 16 digital channels, so it's just like, great. That's perfect. So that's like the one I kind of was toying with, like the one that I'm kind of thinking of is like 600 to 700 pounds, and it's just like, yeah, that's perfect. Especially considering I have to buy a 39, like I'm going to be buying a 3950X. So yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled at well, I don't know. It can wait. It's no, like, there's no rush to this, right? Like I'm not in any well, by the time I'm able to take the measurements I want, nobody will care about them anymore, but at least I will. So that's kind of the way I look at it. It's kind of how it's like why I'm so cool with just not buying it. Like, yeah, that's kind of why I'm kind of okay with just going like, oh, look at all this new hardware that I'm like, I'll just wait a year before I can, like for a 2080 Ti or something. It's just like, I'll wait 2 years and then it'll be dirt cheap and irrelevant. Awesome. So yeah, that's kind of my plan on how to get to play with a 2080 Ti someday, is just like wait until they're cheap. Best way to get to play with it, because it's like the overclocking experience isn't going to change if the card is 1 year old or 5 years old. Well, it might be more difficult to find like overclocking tools and stuff when it's old and irrelevant, but that's kind of the only thing that's really a concern. Anyway, so yeah, the master, it's doing like, well, at LLC levels that you might actually use, like turbo, it's 90 millivolts. High, it's 100. Here, no, that's the gaming 7. Wait, high is high consistent? There it's 90. Oh, because, yeah, see, this is the right rounding thing. Why do I have that 1.45? Oh, yeah, because I was getting annoyed at this. Like, this is a real problem. Like, the fact that, like, because here's the thing. So this is a voltage measurement from the substrate of the CPU. And it should not be physically possible for the voltage drop across the substrate to change as I lower the LLC setting. Now, it could be that because there's less overshoot, that the rounding is like, well, the averaging is spitting out a lower value, but the thing is the RMS voltage has stayed the same as well. So, yeah. And the minimums are coming up, so it's not like those are dragging it down. So, Like, I don't get, I don't get it, because this is an average voltage as well. Like, that's the thing is, like, this is the average voltage that the IR35201 sees. This is the average voltage the oscilloscope sees. These should not be changing, right? Like, on the gene, they barely change at all, right? I think this one's mostly a rounding thing where it's like, I didn't set the volt. Like, maybe I needed to set that to 1.54, and then it would have still read 1.296 because the Super IO really isn't that accurate either, and then this would have been 1.37, but... yeah. Because, well, on the dark, I don't have DyeSense. But if we look at, like, the Asrock board, right? Like, that one's consistent. That one's really consistent. And if we look at the Z370 Gaming 7, that one's also consistent. Admittedly, like, at high, I didn't set the voltage high enough. So it's at 1.28 and, you know, it lowers that to 1.35. But, yeah, this is consistent. And then there's the master where it's just like the voltage does weird things for reasons nobody can understand. Or at least I can't understand. Which is really, really annoying. So, yeah. I wonder if the DyeSense reading might not be accurate. Like, maybe the pin contact in the socket is screwed up and the DyeSense is not accurate as a result of that. Because that is actually possible. Like, there's a fail-safe mechanism if the DyeSense isn't connected properly. So, yeah. That's really annoying. Anyway. So, yeah, that's the thing is, like, this is 1.455. I should have well... Yeah, I really screwed up my own data, didn't I? That's always fun as well. So we'll just go like this would have been 90 had some idiot not added 5 millivolts here to try get this back, get this back up because... Yeah, well, this is annoying. But yeah, so the master is basically in the same performance range as the Phantom. Might be slightly worse. And everything basically loses to the gene, and then even the gene loses to the dark. And not because, like, the dark blows it away. Like, if you use a reasonable LLC setting, like a level 5 on the gene, or even a level 6, right, you actually get... No, you don't, because this is 80. So, no, you need to use, like, level 5 in order to match the dark even at level, well, 50. Right, like minus 50% droop to match the transient response of the dark, you need to set the gene to like level 5. So, yeah, though it is worth noting that like the minimum here is still really low because, well, the voltage, like, because that's the thing is just like, if you're not averaging a high current draw, well, no, if you have very little droop, your voltage is not going to go up when you pull less current, right? So that's kind of the thing is just like, and that's where the offset voltage settings on the master, if you run offset voltage, that really manages to cheat quite well because it just bumps up the 128K way up in terms of voltage because it sees that the current draw is really low. And maybe it's also like the thing I'm wondering about is how it's maintaining like such a, like the minimum is so close to this. So like this looks like it's a non-linear load line because like well, actually it might be insanely steep. Because the thing is, like the idle, like here's the thing. This may very well look like, it could be like 1.59 volts at like full droop or something crazy like that. So yeah, this is probably just like an insanely steep load line. Actually, no, it isn't, because I remember testing it with like lower core counts, and it was running reasonable voltages. So yeah, that's the thing with dynamic voltage, is just like it can do weird things, which can be beneficial. It's just like it's annoying for comparison's sake, but basically because this is so high, the minimums are good, right? And then this is really high, so the minimums are good. And then your idle is fine. Like, your idle isn't insane because, well, it's offset voltage, so it can idle really low voltage. So it was averaging 0.84, but maxing out at 1.46, which still isn't as bad as if you had, like, low LLC and 1.54 volts set, which would max out at 1.55. So that's great. So, or really, like, a lot of boards. So, yeah, offset voltage on the master is something, like, now I need to investigate offset voltage on more boards, which I think I mentioned earlier in this video. I think I'm starting to go in circles at this point. I'm going crazy for measuring voltages. Seriously, I've not been doing anything but measuring voltages for, like, the last couple days. So, there's a pretty good chance that I'm losing it at this point. Or I've done too many. No, I've only done like 3 takes. I've forgotten how many. I think it's 3. I'm pretty sure I've done only 3 takes. Anyway, I should wrap this up. So basically, the differences between all of the motherboards I've tested right now are like 20 millivolts from the worst to the best, which is like 100 millivolts peak, average to minimum is 100 millivolts on the edge, and the dark manages 80. The Gene also manages 80. The Master in some scenarios manages 90. The Phantom Gaming is always 90, and I think that's everything. Oh, and the Z370 Gaming 7, I do want to mention this. It is irredeemably bad. There's nothing I can do to that VRM to not make it suck more. So I'm really disappointed with that board. Because I went really far in terms of modification. Well, not really far, but pretty far in terms of modifications on it, and it just didn't improve at all. I do plan to do more to the Master, but there's other things. Well, do I? Yes, I do. I'm going to do more to the Master. And it is worth noting, like, another thing worth noting is I might be able to test a Maximus 11 Apex, because I really like the Apex has some really interesting differences in terms of its power delivery compared to the Gene, that could make it perform as well as the Dark does. And then the other board, like, I picked up a Z370 Extreme 4 from Asrock just because I want to see how, like, that's like a low-end board. Because all of the boards I've tested so far are high-end boards. And so I'm really wondering, like, how does a low-end board compare to, no, this isn't high-end, but it's an ITX. They're special. So, yeah, I want to test a, like, cheap ATX motherboard. I want to see how that does, and it's not like a Z390 Pro from Gigabyte. Like, I want to see, because the thing is, like, the Gigabyte is an intercell, and I think the Gigabyte is, no, it is an intercell, isn't it? Yeah, it's an intercell, but I want to see somebody else's implementation of a intercell VRM. Basically, I really wish I could test, like, all of the boards out there, but as you can probably tell, I'm losing it after only testing 1, 2, 3, 4, the different revisions count, 5, 6, oh wait, one of the revisions is missing here, so 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I have a problem. Okay, I have wait, why is there 2 Aorus Pro? Oh, that's the ITX one. Yeah, so, evidently testing, I need to lay off the oscilloscope. More like the Probinator. Or both, actually both, really. But, anyway, yeah. I do really want to see some more motherboards for comparisons, because it's just like, I don't know, after the testing so far, I feel like I'm probably not going to see anything that's, a massive difference. Which also makes me, like, But the thing is like I have basically very few examples of like various motherboard configurations. So it's like I'd like to test motherboards with more motherboard, like a few different implementations of motherboards with doublers. I'd like to see, because the thing is just like, you know, maybe some board vendor is doing something differently from another, where it's like their VRM with international rectifier parts with doublers just has a different firmware configuration or a different power plane design or a different capacitor configuration, and that translates into significantly better transient, or not maybe significant. I don't think there's going to be a significant difference, because let's be honest, there's a difference of what, 20 millivolts between all of the boards I tested. Actually, I think it's 30, because I think I didn't test the Aorus Pro, but this one, well, no, that's just a pile of overshoot, isn't it? Yeah, because that right there, oh no, that's 110. That's 100. Nah, I'm going to call that a pile of overshoot. Like, it's literally just a pile of, for the most part, it's a pile of overshoot. It eventually gets 100 millivolts. So, you know, admittedly, that's at like high LLC. So if I did voltage normalized for that, that would probably need like, well, that's Dysense 1.26. So I would need to be set to like 1.44 volts. Which actually, that's a reasonable voltage, right? Like that's like the gene at level 5, isn't it? Yeah, that's the gene at level 5. Yeah. So and the gene at level 5 is oh, that's the revision 1. Wait, is there a difference between those revisions? No, the gene just consists. Wait, really? Did I make progress? This testing methodology might not be as... Actually, no, it did knock it down. I guess it's from the overshoot reduction. Well, yeah, it's probably from the overshoot reduction. There's not really anything else that changed, but... Okay, well, whatever. Like, a stock gene is 90. Well, like... Actually, no, this... no, we can't use that version of the gene, because that one's really like not that one's the one with the replaced inductors and stock capacitor configuration. That one is really like adding capacitors, I'd argue, is a smaller change to the VRM than replacing all the inductors. Like that is a pretty drastic modification. So okay, but still it's like, you know, yeah, so that isn't that far off the performance of the gene if you're running high LLC, right? Like that's kind of the thing. And what am I looking at? There we go. Yeah, because that's 1.44 at level 5. And then, well, it's 1.44 at level 5 here, and it's like 1.39 versus 1.31. And 1.44 on the gigabyte would be like 1.38 versus 1.28. Right, I'm just adding 40 millivolts to it, because most of the time that's actually exactly how it behaves. It might maybe pick up 50 instead of 40, but whatever. Like, it would happen on both sides of that. So... yeah, that's the thing, is just like, okay, so even that, like, that wouldn't be a huge difference, right? Like, that'd be 100 millivolts for this board. And yeah, there's a configuration in which this board is absolutely atrocious, where you're like 140 millivolts a peak, like, from average to minimum, but that's at Ultra Extreme LLC, which you should not be using. So I don't really see a problem with that being completely... like, Ultra Extreme LLC being awful is just kind of like, yep, that's Ultra Extreme LLC for you. You shouldn't be using it. Unless you have a dark, because the dark is magic and it just somehow manages to muscle through even ultra extreme, right? Like, this is still a 90 millivolt difference. The dark, it's magical. Yeah. So that's kind of that. That's the end of this video. It's 50 minutes long. I was worried it was going to approach an hour. I've really lost sense of time at this point. So, yeah. Yeah, so basically the extra boards that I'm getting is like, I'll be like, they're probably going to be within 10 millivolts of everything I've tested so far. I should go out and buy like the cheapest Z370 motherboard out there and test that. Right? Like... nah, but I don't want to buy a trash motherboard. I don't like trash motherboards, because then it's like I have a box with a motherboard where it's just like, yeah, I know, like, well, no, actually, no, I can think of something. Well, if I bought a really trash motherboard, like bottom of the barrel Z370, I could buy like a cheap, like 4-phase Z370 MATX Asus? No, I want an Asus one because like those are at least aesthetically like to me they're aesthetically appealing. Um, Also they have VRM settings that well actually do they? No, some of them have VRM settings, but I don't know. Like I'll have to well maybe I'll just go on eBay and look like buy whatever happens to be cheapest there, regardless of the brand. That's like a Z370 board and check that out. And I guess we can do like silly experiment. Like somebody suggested to me that I should do an experiment where I like take off the capacitors that are already on the motherboard, like just remove them to see how many capacitors you need to remove before the voltage regulation gets like completely crap. But it's just like I like my 8700K working, so well I guess I could always do that testing at much lower voltages, right? Like 'cause that's kind of the thing is like I don't really want to see like massive overshoot. Um, and I guess that could make for a kind of fun video because I can like, well, I can just rip the capacitor off the board if I don't care, right? That's the thing. Actually, that's the easiest way to remove polymers. Is not like trying to desolder polymers from power planes freaking sucks. Like through hole polymers from power planes sucks, but ripping the head of the capacitor off, very easy actually. It's my preferred method. um, so yeah. Yeah, I'll guess, but I wanted to test the Extreme 4 because, I don't know, it just seemed like an interesting motherboard to test. Also, it's a 4-DIMM Asrock, so I guess I could try some memory overclocking on that. Anyway, yeah, that's it for the video. At this rate, I'm going to make it into an hour, so I'll just say thank you for watching, or more like thank you for suffering through this. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And what else was there? Comments, right. I have a Patreon, which funds things like the purchases of low-end motherboards for abusive testing with the Probinator. Yeah, so you can support me directly through that. There's a link to the Patreon down in the description below. And then, of course, there is the AHOC Teespring store where there's stickers, there's posters, there's shirts, and those help out with running the channel immensely as well. So if you'd like to check those out, that would be awesome. And yeah, that's it for the video. So thanks for watching and goodbye.